Here's an Idea Channel episode about Idea Channel. Depending upon how you count it, this here episode is somewhere between the 98th and 103rd episode of Idea Channel. Even we couldn't come to a consensus regarding where we are in full episode numbers, but regardless, we wanted to celebrate this milestone, or range of milestones, and a while ago, a bunch of you guys suggested we do so by making an Idea Channel about Idea Channel. So, we're gonna do that.
What's the show about?
But to keep it distinct from the Q&A video we did a while ago, I'm gonna talk less about how we make Idea Channel and more about what we hope to accomplish by making it. So that means there's gonna be some authorial intent expressed here. So if you don't want to have your Idea Channel fanfics invalidated, you should probably amscray. Or here, actually, it's an alternate universe episode. Okay, now that that's out of the way. The elevator pitch for Idea Channel is something like, we apply philosophical and critical concepts to things in the popular culture canon, and we do it in a vlogging format. One of the most frequent comments that I see is the accusation that we are rip-offs of Ray William Johnson's =3 and or Vsauce wannabes. All of those comments are absolutely correct. I mean, rip-off seems really harsh, but Idea Channel is directly inspired by those two shows. And the Brian Lehrer show on WNYC in New York, actually. I really like Brian Lehrer. We didn't decide to make this thing the way we do because the kids will watch it. You know, for kids. But rather because it is very, very important for Idea Channel to be a part of the culture it is describing. We can only discuss certain things in certain ways if Idea Channel is the way it is. Otherwise, we run the risk of looking like some kind of external authority attempting to objectively or correctly describe media or communities, and that just sounds boring. So I jump back and forth from side to side, talk fast, and Morgan, BJ, and Brian pool their collective pop culture prowess to bring you perfectly illustrative asset favorites such as
No! Huge! Come on!
And Ben, our motion graphics guy, does, well, you've seen what Ben does. I say something overwrought or dense, and he clarifies it with a visual masterpiece involving my face, one mythical creature, probably a weird machine of some kind, and maybe an explosion or two. The upshot being that though some of the concepts are highfalutin, we are no less steeped in the kind of media that we're talking about, which, as far as lots of people are concerned at least, is pretty low-falutin. This makes it possible for us to celebrate while we are asking questions, which is really the twofold mission of Idea Channel: to exclaim, but then dissect, but never really tell. Most media doesn't explicitly tell you how to live in the world, but rather portrays a situation with characters and shows a way one might be. Likewise, we try really hard with IC to not tell you what to think. I try to be really clear when we're talking about things that I think, and I try to be really honest about my biases. Which should, I hope they're all very clear. I'm not always great at it. Biases are a very hard thing to be conscious of, but I like to think I'm honest about it, and I'm always open to being wrong. Ideally, we're illustrating how one might think, one way to think, one could, if they were so inclined, and that is also why we respond to comments. Perspective is more valuable than answers, and tons of that perspective comes from you. If I could respond to every single comment, I would. However, I am but one man, and there is only so much coffee in New York City. The closest we can get to truth in critical thinking happens only by way, I think, of being considerate and inclusive. This applies to audiences and their experiences as much as it does to media and culture. And here we are back at high versus low falutin. All parts of culture, from WarioWare to War and Peace, are worthy of respect, scrutiny, critique, dissection, and celebration. By doing these things, we can find out where their faults and strengths are, what pressures they can sustain, and what they're made of. In turn, we can also find out our own faults and strengths, what an audience can sustain and is made of. Marshall McLuhan wrote that all media work us over completely. It's our goal with Idea Channel to show what that work is and how it's done differently to different people. Idea Channel is not the first to do this. We are certainly not the best. As a matter of fact, I want to stress, I am not a professional. I'm a musician, theater nerd, and former programmer. I'm not a philosopher, critic, or academic by training, and it'd be totally fair if your takeaway from that was, well, this guy has no idea what he's talking about. But I'd hope that your takeaway is something closer to the opposite of the jackass warning. This person is not a professional. Please try this at home. Media and technology and whatever happens when the two team up, it all plays a massive role in our lives. And yet, so many people question the importance of that media while rarely, if ever, questioning the importance of, say, science. How often do you think Destin or Emily or Neil deGrasse Tyson are accused of overthinking some instance of inquiry? I'm gonna guess not often, but if I go 2 days without being accused of overthinking, that is a win. I'm not complaining, it doesn't make me mad, I'm just disappointed. That any critical consideration of media is so often dismissed as purposeless says lots about how media is valued, what people think it's for, and what people think it does. You cannot escape the effects of media. It is not, has never been, and will never be just entertainment. Not asking questions about your culture is like not asking questions about gravity or the oceans or your own body. And if you do ask these questions, you can come to possess the same level of powerful understanding of the world that we unhesitatingly attribute to the sciences. And I don't know, if we, the tiny, weird YouTube show shot in a corner on a 3-year-old camera, can inspire even a small number of people to ask some of those questions, that is why we make Idea Channel. What do you guys think? Those are our big, lofty goals for this tiny show. Are we accomplishing any of them? Be honest. And what do you think the purpose is of studying media the way that we do? And do we get to the heart of any of it? Let us know in the comments. And if you've made it this far into the 98th through 103rd episode special, you probably already know what I'm gonna ask. Some people seem to think it's possible that me, Wheezy, and Michael from Vsauce are clones. Actually, we're triplets. Let's see what you guys had to say about Orphan Black and the simulacrum. Matthew Falcon writes a really great comment about Voltaire and the possibility of seeing everything and therefore nothing as simulacra. And yeah, this reminds me, it's, what is Voltaire's quote is, originality is not but judicious imitation. And Brian Masumi actually writes about Baudrillard's attitude towards the presence of the simulacrum. He calls it one long lamentation because of Baudrillard's disposition, but also writes about how Deleuze saw this as an opportunity to question the importance that we place on the model copy way of looking at things, which I think is basically the idea that you're getting at. So yeah. And speaking of Deleuze, Kayla Hafley writes a comment about how the brilliance of Orphan Black kind of shows that everybody is a simulacrum of some kind. And this was actually, Deleuze said that the way man was made in God's image, but through sin, lost the spiritual resemblance, but kept the surface level resemblance, makes humanity itself a simulacrum. So you and Deleuze on the same page. Shane Tilton asks whether or not I am saying any statistical representation of a given population is somehow a simulacra, and I'm still a little out to lunch on this one, but I think I would say that I'm saying extrapolations are what would create that simulacrum when, you know, like I think of the census, which I do not understand perfectly, so this might be totally off base, as being ideal, where you have every point of data represents itself. But then I think of Nielsen as being the other side of the continuum, where you have one point representing a much larger extrapolated mass in a way that is unclear at best, is maybe what I'm saying. So yeah, but this is a good question. Ivan Arsaldias asks us to consider the possibility that Sarah is herself still a simulacrum, and that she is just a part of the system that has been sold on some kind of false idea of rebellion. But then Occam Sauce basically has the exact opposite opinion and identifies her as what happens when someone finally figures out how to break free of whatever kind of repression comes from that system. So, I mean, I think this is right. This is an indication that Orphan Black is a good show. I think that you can read it in two completely opposite ways. Wickham Judson says that looking at this thing with an eye towards the original is kind of missing the point, and that really what we're looking at is an illustration of nature versus nurture, right? That all of these characters all have the same nature, but they have all been brought up in different situations, and that there is a great lesson to be learned there, which, yeah, I totally agree. Relatedly, Peter Fox has a unique experience of Orphan Black because he is an identical twin and sees, again, the importance of and presence of nature versus nurture. And yeah, Jean Baudrillard actually wrote about identical twins a little bit in, he has this paper called Clone Story, and he said that the act of cloning itself, what it does is it enshrines the reiteration of the same, which is different from twins, right? Though the effect might end up being similar, you have people who look exactly like one another, it's the act of cloning that gets into this simulacra-y zone. But yeah, I never thought about Orphan Black coming from the point of view of identical twins. This is, yeah, new material to work through. Liad Milo adds an additional layer and says that Tatiana Maslany herself could be seen as a simulacrum because she so fully inhabits the roles of her characters that the original has disappeared. And yeah, there's a lot of writing about whether or not acting is some sort of controlled creation of simulacrum. And Shauna Blake, this is something that Shauna Blake touches on in her comment and says that beyond the presence of cloning, Orphan Black doesn't seem any more positioned to talk about simulacrum than, you know, visual media with performers in general. So what do you guys think? Yeah, acting, simulacrum, just in general? This week's episode is brought to you by the hard work of these question askers. We have a Facebook, an IRC, and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo. And the tweet of the week comes from Brian Block, who points us towards a New York Times piece illustrating exactly what your Fitbit band up thing is measuring. Turns out it's less than you would think. And finally, a bit of news to celebrate our 98th through 103rd episode milestone and my 30th birthday. We're going to be taking 1 week off. So the next time you see me will be 2 weeks from now. Actually, that might not be true. If you keep your eyes peeled, you might see some caps lock poetry. And for this week's record swap, we will be replacing Sunset Rubdown's Random Spirit Lover with the Dismemberment Plan's Uncanny Valley. One of my favorite bands of all time. All right, so adios, Sunset Rubdown, and welcome, a big welcome, to the Dismemberment Plan.